Banjo-Kazooie, despite being a well-loved game, hasn't gotten a new entry since 2008, and it's been even longer since the last platformer in the series. As for why this is, I would assume it's because Rare was a very different developer by this point. Most of the original developers were long gone, and I mean, the first Banjo game they made in well over a decade was a car-building game. That action alone makes me feel like they were pretty disinterested in platformers in general. 3D platformers as a whole were just kinda dead in this generation. The only ones holding that torch would be Mario, Sonic, and Ratchet. As someone who mainly plays 3D platformers, I wasn't very happy about this. Then something magical happened. A bunch of ex-Rare employees got together and formed a new team called Platonic Games with the intention of making a spiritual successor to Banjo-Kazooie. It was first teased as Project Yooka-Laylee, along with its image right here. Not long after, the game was fully revealed to be called Yooka-Laylee. Then a very successful Kickstarter happened, raising over $2 million and surpassed every stretch goal. Heck, even I backed this project. I never backed a Kickstarter project before this. It was only $8 because I was a broke teenager, but I did it. And I also made it into the credits, so yeah. Let's ignore the fact that credits are 3 hours long and no one will ever see it. Everything about Yooka-Laylee seemed great. It basically looked like the long-awaited Banjo 3E. There was even a demo released called the Toy Box Plus demo. I wasn't able to get it at the time because you would need to pre-order the game digitally, and I am all about those plastic cases taking up space. I did, however, play it for this video through, sketchy methods. Anyway, it's actually a lot of fun. It controls beautifully. It's not the most polished thing in the world, but it's not supposed to be. It was intended as a spoiler-free demonstration of the game's controls, which is why the level is comprised of reused assets from the main game in giant yellow and green blocks. You can tell it's an earlier version of the game, mostly because some of the animations aren't as polished as the final games. Oh, and this was when the game was still planned to be released on the Wii U. Yeah, I actually completely forgot that was a thing, even though that was the console I was originally going to get the game on. If you manage to 100% the demo, the game gives you a hint on where a secret is in the final game. This was so cool to me. It's the epitome of these kind of games. These types of games want you to explore as much as possible, and giving you a hint that's only available in a demo for a super obscure secret in the final game is just a really cool idea to me. I mean, as long as it's not something that's required for 100% and more like something that's just worth experiencing, like, I don't know, a test room or something. That would be kinda crap if you needed knowledge from a demo most people didn't play in order to 100% the game without a walkthrough of some kind. Thankfully that's not the case though. In short, everything was looking great. I was a little concerned after watching the trailers because it looked like it shared some of the same problems as Banjo-Tooie, but I still thought the game looked good overall. However, when the game actually came out, opinions were varied. You had people who loved it, liked it, thought it was alright, and people who straight up hated it. There was never a moment I thought I would straight up hate it, but I also wasn't that excited because I just had overall mixed feelings after seeing it, but I did feel kind of obligated to get it considering I was in the credits and I backed it in Kickstarter, and 3D platformers are incredibly rare. And I did eventually get it, and I had an alright time with it. I had pretty mixed feelings after playing it, even still, and I still liked it. I mean, it scratched that Banjo itch, but I thought it had a lot of problems and prevented it from being a great game, just alright. But then I played it again on Switch because rebuying games I already own on the Switch seems to be a favorite pastime of mine. And I had a significantly better time. I still thought it had a lot of problems, but I liked it a lot more, and I think that has to do with the fact that there's a lot of things that just annoyed me in my first playthrough, but I knew how to work around that stuff, or I just knew the game better, so that just was less of an issue. I don't know, but I liked it a lot more at that playthrough. I don't know how to transition to the video, so, yeah. Yooka-Laylee's story begins in Highbury Towers, where Capital B, the boss, and his assistant, Dr. Quacker, are discussing the One Book. A book that allows you to change reality simply by writing in it. Sponge out of water did it first! Anyway, obviously Capital B, being a greedy CEO, desperately wants this book, and he had his assistant Dr. Quacker build a Novelizer 64 to obtain it, a machine that can suck up every book in the world. Cut to the nearby Shipwreck Creek. Yooka and Laylee are relaxing, admiring their new property, when suddenly their book and all of its pages flies off to the sky. Yooka and Laylee go off to investigate, and it doesn't take long for them to find Highbury Towers, the place where all these pages scattered off to. This presents a problem. Not just because their book happens to be the one book capital B is after, but also because all 145 pages scattered across not just Highbury Towers, but the 5 tomes within the building, tomes being the giant books that contain worlds. The premise is perfectly fine, but much like the original Banjo-Kazooie, the characters are what makes this plot. Yooka and Laylee are basically just Banjo and Kazooie. They have basically the same personality, Yooka being the kind-hearted, easygoing leader, while Laylee is the loudmouth, sarcastic companion. They even do this thing where Laylee says something offensive and Yooka quickly scolds her by shouting her name, which was a thing Banjo-Kazooie did a lot. That being said, I love Banjo and Kazooie's character dynamic, and I think it works out just as well here. Thankfully, the other characters are a bit more original. Capital B shares some similarities with Grungy, like how he taunts you throughout the game while you traverse through the hub world. He's still very much his own villain. All the jokes surrounding him are business related instead of constant threatening rhymes. Though I still haven't talked about the objectively best character in this game, and it'll be a bit longer before I do. This game, unsurprisingly, plays like Banjo-Kazooie. It's a Collect-a-thon 3D platformer, with the main goal being to get as many of those pages from Yooka and Laylee's book as you can, except they're called pages, and they're alive. They actually gave these guys a load of personality, and I love it. A ton of them are just stuck in cages. Oh, I'm sorry, cages. Anyway, early on Yooka brings up a very valid point that they're paper and could very easily slide out of there. So the pagey claims he never thought to do that and tries and fails to get out and claims it's impossible. Much later in the game, when a cagey refuses to open, the pagey immediately decides to do that. And Laylee questions if they could have done that at any point, why haven't they, and he responds with, "You have to understand. It's quite comfortable in there." So many pages in this game at the very least made me smile a little bit, and I'm so happy they decided to give the main collectible a personality. You get pages by beating bosses, solving puzzles, fulfilling objectives, and plenty more. Thankfully, they're much closer to the Jiggies in Banjo-Kazooie than the ones in Tooie, which if you've seen that video, you'd know that the Jiggies are what killed Tooie for me. The closest to Banjo-Tooie a pagey felt in this game was that one mission in Glitter Glaze Glacier where you need to find all the snowman's hats. And that one was tedious, don't get me wrong, but I can name like 20 Jiggies in Tooie that are so much worse. I actually didn't think too many pages in this game are all that annoying, but there are a few recurring mission types that are kind of but I don't think they're too bad, and I'd rather get to them later. Anyway, the actual function of the pages are very similar to the Jiggies in Banjo-Kazooie. You need to spend pages in order to unlock more worlds, but you can also expand worlds. Every world is already pretty big by default, but you can make them even bigger by spending even more pages at the Grand Tome. I think the idea behind this was to appease both crowds, the crowd that prefers the smaller Banjo-Kazooie levels and the crowd that prefers the much larger Banjo-Tooie levels. The problem with this is, despite being a part of the crowd that vastly prefers Banjo-Kazooie, I feel like playing the smaller versions is just objectively worse. I mean, unless I'm missing something here. If you're playing an unexpanded version of a level, you're gonna later have to retread a lot of the same areas you've already explored. So I think it's just better to just expand the levels as soon as possible. The levels are already really big before the expansion, so it's not like that satisfied Kazooie fans anyway, so I think the expansion feature is just kinda pointless. It's not a huge deal or anything. After the first level you can just easily expand each level before even entering it, so it's pretty easy to just pretend the feature doesn't exist, which is what I do. Quills are another important collectible. They're basically the musical notes, except there's 200 in each level. I don't think they're handled as well as the notes in Banjo-Kazooie, to be honest. That game, they were usually just a collectible that led you to new areas, but in Yooka-Laylee, they were pretty frequently a very out-of-the-way collectible. Especially this one in the first level. Who would go here? Why is this a thing? This is dumb. I just think these kind of collectibles work better when they're used as a supplement, if that makes any sense. Like, they're primarily there to lead you to new areas, but they're never too out of the way because they just hold a lot less value compared to any other collectible. That is not how it's handled in Yooka-Laylee. Plenty of these take a lot of time to get, and it just adds to the overall tedium, though I do appreciate how you don't lose them when you die. And they even have a way to find those last few quills, which I'll get into later, which solves one of the biggest reoccurring issues that this genre has. Their purpose is pretty similar to the notes' purpose in Banjo-Tooie. You need to spend them to get new moves from Trouser, the objectively best character in the game. Look at him and tell me he isn't one of the best character designs you've ever seen. The way they got a snake to wear pants is absolutely genius, and the actual character himself is great. He's a salesman who's willing to basically squeeze the heroes for all they're worth, even if it means preventing them from stopping an evil corporation from forming a monopoly. He's basically moneybags from the Spyro games, and he's just as entertaining. The writers clearly had a lot of fun writing his dialogue, and of course Laylee works off him really well. Anyway, most of the moves you'll get from him will require quills. The moves are pretty cheap starting out, but they get more and more expensive as the game goes on. I think my favorite move is a Reptile Rush, otherwise known as the Spin Dash. It allows Yooka to curl up in a ball to charge up for some speed, like the famous speedy video game character, Trouser. Man, I love those games. There's also the Lizard Lash, a move that allows Yooka to use his tongue to grapple onto things. Though I found it could be a little finicky, I just had a hard time figuring out the exact spot I should be in to use it. Laylee has a lot of sonar-based abilities, like the Sonar Shot, which is almost exclusively used with these sleepy totem dudes and one specific kind of Ghost Rider. There's the Sonar Explosion, a move that basically breaks any nearby object, and there's the Sonar Shield, which just makes you invincible. You'll occasionally get free moves from him too, specifically before each level. These tend to be the coolest, rolling, forming a bubble around you, allowing you to walk underwater, using camouflage, and even flying. Unlike the Banjo games, you don't even need a specific pad to fly, you can just do it anywhere, and the game clearly was not designed around it. It's a cool move, but something like this absolutely needs more polish than what it got. It also controls pretty poorly, to be honest, which is weird because the normal controls are great. Seriously, Yooka has some of the tightest controls in a 3D platformer I've played. But then like any form of movement other than just walking feels weird. My problem with these moves is all of them rely on this bar on the top left. I don't mind these moves being limited in some way, but there are so many times I've just kinda had to stand around waiting for it to refill. This is especially annoying with the rolling move. The roll is basically Kazooie's Talon Trot, which allow you to go faster and go up steep slopes. However, for some reason this move is also tied to that bar, and why? These levels are absolutely massive, they very clearly want you to do this everywhere, but it's so easy for it to run out. So frequently I would have to just stop rolling to wait for the gauge to fill back up, and that just slowed the game down way more than it needed to. Certain upgrades do make this less of an issue, but it doesn't really go away. Considering the Talon Trot was unlimited, I really don't get why this had to be the case. Maybe it's because it's faster than the Talon Trot? If that is the case, I thought the less control you had with it balanced it out. You can also refill that gauge with these butterflies, or alternatively you can eat them to regain health, and of course that reminds me of Spyro because why wouldn't it? You can also increase the power meter, or whatever it's called, and your maximum health through a hidden collectible in each level, the butterfly hearts and the power extender. You can also temporarily extend these through tonics thanks to this abomination right here, Vendy. They act as equipable upgrades. I mostly just stuck to the ones that make the power meter refill faster, but there's a few more. Like the one that gives you 1 extra hit point, or the one that whistles whenever you're near a rare collectible. This one's great because it whistles whenever you're near a quill when you have only around 30 left. You know, when you're most likely to be wandering around aimlessly for those last few quills, and the fact they got rid of that problem that has plagued this genre for so long is a major plus. I praise Spyro for a similar thing, but some might prefer the way this game does it because Spyro straight up tells you where the last gems are, while Yooka-Laylee still requires some exploration. There's even a 64-bit tonic that makes the game look like an N64 game, complete with an intentionally low frame rate and a CRT filter. They're even going to have a low poly Yooka and Laylee character model down the line, and that is really cool, but to me, there's a lot of charm in the way the games from this era looked, but the bad frame rate and scale lines aren't part of it, so I wish there was a way to turn it off. It's not even available on PS4 or Xbox One yet, only Switch and PC. Not sure what's taking so long. Whenever that does change, or if there is any other big updates, I will make sure to pin a comment. I like this idea, I just kinda wish you could equip more than one, especially because a few of these don't actually act as upgrades. There's also the Molecools. They're kinda like the Mumbo tokens from Banjo-Kazooie, but in this case you only need one. So I guess they're more like the Globos. Anyway, you need to give them to Dr. Puzz and she'll transform you into whatever transformation that level has to offer. Yep, transformations are back, and I think they're done better than Kazooie's, but they're still pretty underwhelming. You typically only need them for one Pagey in each level, and they're all kinda lame, except the piranhas. Those are actually really cool. Oh, and I do enjoy the fact you need to pollinate very horny flowers. They're just not a lot of fun to control, but they're at least inoffensive, unlike Tubi's. You can also find these super well hidden collectibles, the pirate tokens. There's one in each level, but they are really hard to find, and all they do is give you achievements, so maybe they're not all that worth getting. If you're playing on Switch, there is in-game achievements, so at least there's some purpose on there. If you do decide to get them, please use the walkthrough, because they are in very obscure parts in these levels, and these levels are pretty freaking massive in case you haven't noticed. I don't really like the big levels in Tooie, and these are honestly worse in a lot of ways. A lot of this game's level design just seems to be huge, flat plains with a bunch of platforming challenges scattered on top, and that makes these levels' layout so much harder to remember. Nothing feels cohesive. All these sections in these levels could easily have 100% different placement, and it would have little impact on the levels as a whole. This was absolutely not the case in Banjo-Kazooie's or even Tooie's levels, and it made those levels stand out far more. Not every level is designed like this, like Glitter Glaze Glacier and Tribal Stack Tropics are designed in a much more natural way, so those levels are a bit easier to remember. I say a bit, but I still got lost in Tribal Stack Tropics. Not to mention, again, these levels are massive and this game lacks the teleportation feature, even though Tooie had that. This one thing honestly would have made these issues a lot easier to overlook. This is easily this game's biggest problem, and it's the main reason why so many people don't like this game. And the amount of empty space these levels have really doesn't help. I mean, look at this. However, it didn't kill the game for me. I'm not having a lot of fun when I'm just wandering around, but when I actually know what I'm doing, this game can honestly be really great and it retains so much of what I love about open-ended 3D platformers. The puzzles, the secrets, and the platforming challenges can honestly be really great, and sometimes even better than the stuff you'd find in any Banjo game. It just so happens that actually traversing these levels can be a bit of a pain. Let's actually talk about the levels now, starting with the hub world, Highbury Towers. I love the Beehive Factory theme it has going for it, but I think it's just alright. It has secrets to find and many other things you'd expect from hub worlds. I just wish it was a bit easier to get around. If you're just going from point A to point B, not really caring about secrets, it can be really annoying. It's just so big, and getting from one end of the hub to the other takes way too long. There are shortcuts you can unlock as you go deeper and deeper into the hub, but they can be kinda hard to remember where they go, and I don't think they're enough. I would have much preferred if they just copied how Tooie's hub worlds work. I do like how it starts off in Yooka-Laylee's home, which is a broken down pirate ship. There's even a sign that says, "Bat Ship Crazy," and I love that. This area is mainly the tutorial, where it teaches you some of the more basic stuff, like how quills work, or some of the more basic moves like crouching or swimming, or alternatively you can just... yeah. The first actual level is Tribal Stack Tropics, and it's fine. I don't really have much to say on this one. It's a competent start to the game, but there's not much that stands out on this one. Shovel Knight's in it, because this guy just won't stay in his own game, I guess. The second is Glitter Glaze Glacier, and I definitely like this one a lot more. It's the one level in the game I don't really find myself getting lost in, and it has some really cool moments in it. I especially like the Isometric Cave. It's one big reference to those isometric 3D platformers like Sonic 3D Blast, the GBA Spyro games, and even Banjo-Kazooie Granny's Revenge. I know that one's technically not isometric, shut up. This area just has genuinely some of the most interesting puzzles in the game. Oh, and there's also a part where they just kinda took a track from Super Mario Kart. I'm not making that up, Playtonic mentioned that in the developer's commentary.
Here's an interesting fact, the layout of that race is loosely based on one of my favourite tracks on Super Mario Kart, Mario Circuit 2.
I will say this section does go on a bit too long, but not by much. The only real issue I have with this level is there's this one part where you have to do platforming as a truck, and that's just all kinds of awkward. Oh, and the snowman hat, Pagey, can be kind of annoying, but it's not that bad if you just do it as you explore the level. Oh, and I gotta ask, does anyone else think it sounds like Yooka is stepping on squeaky toys whenever he walks on ice? Moody Maze Marsh is probably my least favorite level in the game because it's the most guilty of that unnatural level design issue I mentioned before, but it's not bad. It has some genuinely cool moments, like when you transform into a school of piranhas, or when you leave a shopping cart there to die. There's also a part where I completed a challenge early and a character said something like, "Wow, I didn't even tell you to do that," and Laylee responds with, "I bet it robbed us of all kinds of great dialogue," and that part was probably the funniest part of the game because I really didn't expect the game to call me out like that. There was one mission I hated at first because I thought you had to push the seed into the hole, and this game just doesn't have the greatest physics engine, so that was a problem. I kinda hated life until I realized you can just drag it around with your tongue. This is my third 100% playthrough, and I'm pretty sure I did this in my other two also. I'm an intelligent human being. Capital Casino makes me sound like I have a lisp whenever I say the name, but despite that, it might be my favorite level in the game. It being a casino, you don't typically earn pages the traditional way. In fact, one of the few times you do, they send a giant killer robot after you. You'll typically get rewarded with tokens in this level, and you can exchange every 10 for a pagey with this nice, totally not familiar fellow right here. I like this idea a lot. It fits a casino theme, and I love hoarding these until I can't get any more. Ah yeah, this is happening. Galleon Galaxy is the final level in the game and definitely the most creative. It's a mix between a collection of islands and space. That's pretty dang cool. You do stuff like blow up planets and platform on asteroids. The one complaint I have with this level is that it contains that secret the Toy Box demo alluded to, and I still have no idea what that's about because the robot refuses to tell me. I'm willing to bet whatever the secret is, it'll be in a later update, but I don't know, it just seems kind of lame that they would hint at something so early, and then even like 2 years, or actually almost 3 years at this point, after the original game came out, we still have no idea what that's about. I mean, if anything significant happens, I'll post in the comments, I guess, but yeah, kinda lame. Aside from that, it's still a really cool level nonetheless, but it's unfortunately the only level with an actually unique theme to it. Grass, snow, and swamp are all themes that we've seen a million times, and that's the majority of the game right there. Galleon Galaxy is the only theme in this game I haven't seen anywhere else, and I guess Capital Casino if we're not counting Sonic. I don't mind a few tired themes making into the game, heck Banjo-Kazooie had all of these, but if the game is limited to only 5 levels, I would hope they'd be a bit more creative. Despite the lack of teleportation, the empty space, the unnatural level design, and the somewhat boring themes, I still like these levels. They're pretty flawed if I'm being honest, but I do get a lot of the same kind of joy I get from other levels of this genre, and I do find myself generally having a good time. Another issue these levels have are the enemies, and they are such an afterthought. There's a grand total of 5 enemy types. There's the corplets, they just kind of walk around aimlessly and attack you when they notice you. The Busy Bee, these guys that shoot projectiles in multiple directions at once. The googly eyes, eyeballs that attach themselves to nearby inanimate objects. There are corplet security bots, robots that shoot lasers when you get too close. And that's it. Oh yeah, there's also the corplet Punisher, but they're so rare that I actually almost forgot about them. Thank you, Yooka-Laylee wiki. These are the only enemies used throughout the whole game, and you can so easily ignore them because of how massive these levels are and because of how small and effective these enemies can be. The only enemy that gave me any amount of grief would be the googly eyes. I love the idea of these guys, but they're pretty annoying to kill. When they're charging up their attack, you get hit if you try to attack them, but their charge up animation takes so long I usually just take the hit for the sake of killing them faster, but again, it's pretty easy to just, you know. I know enemies usually aren't a huge thing in 3D platformers, but they at least, you know, feel like they're there for a purpose. There's a few different pagey types these levels share, one being the Ghost Riders. These are basically the Jinjos from Banjo. There's 5 in each level, and if you get all of them, you get a pagey. The key difference is you catch each one differently. There's one that you just kinda have to walk into, much like the Jinjos from Banjo-Kazooie, but there's also another one that's invisible until you shoot it with Laylee's sonar, and there's one you have to feed, or do whatever this is if you're a weirdo like me. The only one I disliked were these big burly ones. They have the same issue as the eyeballs where you can only attack them after they attack, so there's a lot of waiting around. Except this time you can't just tank it, so yeah. Another mission type I'm talking about is the Minecarts sections. They were promised in the Kickstarter and obviously based off the levels from Donkey Kong Country, and there's some of the most jankiest, unpolished parts in the entire game. The objective is to ride Kartos, the god of Ord, down these floating tracks and collect enough of these gems before the track's over. The problem with these is they try to make them 3D by making the track wind around the level, and this causes a very jittery camera. There's also the fact they limit how frequently you can perform certain actions, and that creates a certain level of trial and error because it's not always obvious which action you should do. I didn't really have any trouble with these this playthrough, but I do remember having a much harder time with the last couple in my first playthrough, and it sounds like so did a lot of other people. These aren't the worst things ever, but definitely needed way more polish. Then there's Strohs Arcade. I don't like these. I like Stroh himself. He's basically one big parody of older video games, even to a point where he's missing a few thousand polygons, but the actual minigames suck really bad. They're unfun and last way too long. Oh, and there's also the fact you have to do them twice for both pages, because why not? That's fun. Basically, the first page is just to survive, and the second one is to beat Rexstro's high score. And you still have to beat the minigame twice, even if you already beat Rexstro's high score the first time around. The first few minigames are at least competent, but the last couple are pretty janky. If you bump into just one thing in the casino level 1, the camera outruns Yooka and you don't die until you hit another thing that's off screen. And that just... no. The last one has you repeatedly press the jump button to fly up, but you also press the jump button to respawn after dying, so I kept on doing this thing where I die and continuously respawn in a bad spot until I slowed myself down. I remember having a lot of trouble with the last couple of my first playthrough, but I think I've since learned how to work around the jank. Oh, and I swear I hear Donkey Kong sound effects in the loading screens. At least the music in these levels tend to be good, except the song that plays in the actual arcade. That one was poop. Most of Yooka-Laylee's soundtrack is just fine to me, which is weird because most of the main levels were composed by Grant Kirkhope, the same guy behind the Banjo games, but his songs just didn't stick with me this time around. I think maybe he's just going for a slightly different style that I'm just not as into. I don't know, I know nothing about music, I really couldn't tell you. Grant didn't actually do all the work this time around, he mostly just did the main levels. Steve Burke did most of the minigame themes, and I think they're pretty good. Nothing I listen to outside the game, but it sounds nice while playing the game. David Wise is the guy behind the cart and boss themes, and yeah, they're the best songs in the game easily. I mean, he's the guy who composed the Donkey Kong Country soundtrack, so this really shouldn't be a surprise. And easily, the best song in the entire game would be Track Attack, the theme for the boss Inept. I know this might be a little sacrilegious, but I think I like this song more than any song from any actual Banjo game. Yeah, I'm actually going that far. It's that good. The rest of the boss themes are pretty great too, but man, Track Attack is just on another level. Too bad the actual boss fights aren't great. Yeah, I'm using the same exact transition 2 videos in a row, what are you gonna do about it? Most of them aren't bad, but I wouldn't say any of them are fun either. The first one is just going up this ramp a few times while avoiding some obstacles. I like the idea of slowly melting the second one, but the actual gameplay is really repetitive. The third one is just a little janky because my ground pounds seem to slide off him a little too easily. And the final one just doesn't control too well because you're in a transformation for that one. I don't think the controls are tight enough for a fight like this. But the fight starts off because you kill her husband, so that's pretty cool. Still, I don't dislike any of these, I just didn't think much of them either. The fourth one, Inept, despite having the objectively best theme and name in the entire game, is the only one I thought was kinda bad. You're on a minecart for this one, and all the issues I mentioned before are at their worst in this fight. You could never tell when you should jump, shoot, or boost jump over an obstacle, and if you happen to make the wrong decision, there is a very strong chance you'll get hit in the next obstacle. I remember there being a fake-out lunge attack during the second phase, meaning unless you're psychic and know not to jump at certain lunges, you're gonna get hit. I guess they realized that was dumb, because that didn't happen to me at all this playthrough or even my previous Switch playthrough, so they patched it out. Good on you, Platonic. I love the spectacle of this fight, it genuinely looks really cool and the song is still amazing, but it really needed way more polish. You might have noticed that the lack of polish is a pretty prevalent issue in this game. Well, that unfortunately carries over to the final boss. Unlike Banjo-Kazooie, there isn't a quiz show before the final boss. I mean, there is, but it's not exclusive before the final boss. There's actually one before every main area in the hub. They're way more straightforward than the ones in Banjo games, as in they're just straight lines, and if you happen to answer a question fast enough, you skip a space, which I did every time, because it's not hard. I don't know, I just feel like without some kind of interesting gimmick attached to it, it loses a lot of its charm. So these were kind of a drag for me, but they're pretty painless, so whatever. Anyway, now I'll actually talk about the final boss. Oh, voice crack, that's cool. Thank you for having a recording. Anyway, I'll talk about the final boss now. Ugh. I can tell they tried to mimic Banjo-Kazooie's final boss. There's multiple phases and it gets a little more intense near the end, but it's just not a lot of fun. The first few phases aren't hard, they just kinda take a while. Especially the second one where you just need to repeatedly shoot capital B with ice. It gets a little tricky near the end, but the final phase is straight up unfair. I legitimately have no idea how to avoid the stinger attack. It's pretty easy to avoid while you're flying, but on the ground? No, it's not. I don't even know if it's possible. You can just fly over it, but your flight's limited, so you can't just keep on doing that forever. Thankfully, it's easy enough to keep most of your health up to this point, so you can just tank it, which is what I did, but seriously, please tell me if I'm missing something, because I have to, right? No way they would just have an impossible to avoid attack. Once you beat Capital B, it's revealed that he's not actually in charge. In reality, Dr. Quacker was overseeing Capital B to make sure he does his job. That completely contradicts almost every interaction these two had with each other. It's also just a super anticlimactic ending, and it's a shame considering I actually really enjoyed the endings of the first two Banjo games a lot. Not a huge deal, it is a platformer after all, but a lame ending is still a lame ending. Still not quite done with this video, because I still have a few things to talk about. This game has a multiplayer mode, and it's not that good. It's just the arcade games from the main game, but now a multiplayer, and I thought those minigames sucked. So yeah. There's also a mode where you can just have someone control this cursor during the main game and they can collect items. I think that's it. So it's basically the two-player mode from the Mario Galaxy games, but with even less interactivity. I also kinda want to talk about the Switch version, seeing as that's the weakest console this game is on, and this is a shockingly great port. Aside from lighting and the reduced resolution, this really doesn't look that much different from the other versions. Some of the assets were swapped for less intensive assets, but it's really not noticeable during normal gameplay. The only real complaint I have with this port is that it stutters occasionally, but even the PS4 version does that, just not as much. If you want to know more about this port, Digital Foundry has an excellent video on it that I would highly recommend. If you don't mind the minor downgrades the Switch version has, it's honestly a great way to play the game. I just wish Limited Run Games didn't publish the physical version because it really bothers me I got this digitally and I don't want to pay that much money. But whatever, at least there is a physical version, I guess. Anyway, so that was Yooka-Laylee. I like it. It definitely has a lot of problems, like I feel like it's a bit too close to Banjo. The game's characters are named after an instrument, complete with a hyphen in the logo, too actually. It does the exact same dialogue box thing with the gibberish. Yooka-Laylee's characters are almost identical to Banjo-Kazooie's. The gameplay is more or less the same. Playtonic's logo is really similar to Rare's logo from the 90s, and I mean look at the box art. It's basically a character swap Banjo-Kazooie box art. I get that this is a spiritual successor and Banjo is a dead IP, but I don't think that means you should make a basically legally distinct Banjo-Kazooie. I mean, what happens if Banjo does come back? You might laugh, but dead platformers coming back is a pretty big trend right now. Heck, Banjo already kinda did come back. If Banjo does come back in the form of a remake or even 3E, is anyone even gonna care about Yooka? For any future games, they really should make it stand out more. To be fair, it looks like they did for the sequel, but I haven't played that game for myself. As for the bigger issues, I complain about the lack of polish quite a bit in this video. Many of the game mechanics can be pretty frustrating because they just needed more time in the oven. The ability to fly anywhere kinda just opens up many opportunities to break the game in half, and there's a few things I didn't even mention. Like, I found this small cave in Glitter Glaze Glacier, and I'm pretty sure it's not supposed to be there. I mean, look, there's nothing in here. Why is it here? But the main reason why so many people were disappointed was because of the level design. It's so big and so easy to get lost in, with no way of warping around. Believe me, this is absolutely a big issue, and I can 100% understand why someone wouldn't like this game based off this alone. But it doesn't ruin the game for me, personally. The levels were still genuinely a lot of fun to explore, have a lot of great puzzles and many secrets to find. In other words, it has so much of what I love about Banjo-Kazooie, and it honestly beats Kazooie on many of these. Don't get me wrong, Banjo-Kazooie is a far better game that I would recommend playing before this. But I just thought Yooka did a lot of these specific things in a more interesting way. As for how Yooka-Laylee compares to Tooie, yeah, I like Yooka-Laylee a lot more. Tooie has fewer issues, but the Jiggies alone killed that game for me. Would I recommend it? Yeah? it's a pretty lengthy game. It took me 13 hours to 100%, but this was my third playthrough. The first one took me around 20. So you're definitely going to get some bang for your buck. Just keep in mind, there's a decent chance you won't like the game. But I think it's still worth trying, especially considering I've seen this game go for pretty cheap when it's on sale. Like, as low as $10, and at that price, yeah, go for it. Would I say pay full price? It depends on who you are. I have seen so many people disregard Playtonic just because they think this game's bad, and that is not a mindset I'll ever understand. Not thinking this game is bad, I get that. I like it, but it has a lot of problems. No, I mean disregarding Playtonic just because of this one game. I think it's obvious most of this game's problems stem from a little too much ambition for a Kickstarter project. I mean, the overall lack of polish is like a running theme in this game, basically, and that's probably why. And honestly, I think that's actually an admirable problem if that makes any sense, because that kind of, to me, that seems like that problem just stems from passion. They want to make the biggest, greatest game they possibly can, and sometimes, you know, they do it to a fault. But my overall point being, I don't think this means that they're suddenly bad developers or they just lost all of their magic. I think they just need to listen to some constructive criticism, and after watching the developer commentaries, it really seemed like they did that. And I really do have a lot of faith for the eventual Yooka-Laylee if that ever does happen. I genuinely think that could be a fantastic game, so I really hope it does. Actually, there kind of already is a Yooka-Laylee sequel. It's not like the first game, so I don't really consider it a full-on sequel, but yeah, there is another Yooka-Laylee game, and I'll cover that next video. At the time of recording this, I have honestly barely played it, so I don't really have much of an opinion on it. But yeah, that'll be interesting. I've heard really good things, so I'll see you guys then. Bye. Actually, before I end this video, I just want to pitch something. Trousers Bad Scale Day. Come on, Playtonic. He's the best character in the game, and he's already a living penis joke. Do it! Anyway, bye for real.